Welcome to the You Ain't Got Time for That podcast, where we talk about all things crossing from the corporate world to the startup and small business and entrepreneurial world, talking about etheric ideas and all those things where you say, I've not got time for that. Well, we want to delve into those concepts and uncover them. I'm Zeke Condon, product manager and product entrepreneur, and
I'm Ilan, program manager, thinker, and sometimes doer.
You don't give yourself enough credit. You're a big doer, big thinking doer. And I just want to pick up on something you dropped just as I pressed record. Then, flying to the moon on Bitcoin. Why? Why did we, and why did you, and why does the world not get onto Bitcoin before it flew to the moon? Let's touch on that, Alan.
Wow, there's so many things to unpack there, and I think there's so many tangents also to, I guess, some of what happened last year with COVID. Looking at things in hindsight and going, the logical part of me can draw all those parallels, understand, can see, but why can't you draw the lines between the dots before? And I think some of it is obviously a education piece, but then I think there's also another component, which is also the risk side. So I know in the sort of crypto world, for me, at least early on, my risk appetite, as much as I'd like to think it was there, probably wasn't. So that then prevented me from asking the questions that I needed to ask, thinking, understanding, and even exploring.
So I want to double click into risk here for a second, right? There's a bit of a loaded question throwing that on you, because risk and knowing what we know now about the non-fiat type currencies, i.e. blockchain-based currencies, the risks that everyone initially, before they took off, they haven't changed. But what has changed? It's the understanding and the acknowledgement of what is possible with these concepts. Good thing to tie back into the ain't got time for that. It's so the risk. I think a lot of investing in a lot of technology, a lot of new ideas, innovation, all that. And this is from my point of view. I'm keen to understand your point of view about the concept of risk. When we're looking at innovation, new ideas, is risk real, or is risk more just a perception of what we don't know? And how can we overcome that?
I think there's absolutely two sides to it. I don't think it's categorically one or the other. I think there is probably a personality element to it, where certain personalities see things that they don't understand as potentially being riskier, whereas others will potentially use that blind spot then to their benefit or to the benefit of actually action. And then the other side of it is obviously there's probably, or definitely I should say, some truth to the risk. And I think you can never get away. You can never mitigate it 100% in the real world, but you can actually understand what you're getting into. And I think sometimes the more you understand it, the more to the detriment it is, at least with my personality. But then other personalities are different. I think you've got a slightly riskier personality. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. I have a riskier personality, but It's not risk as in I just take risks, blatantly take risks. I've gone, my kind of ethos is just get a broader understanding of everything. That means that you can attack risk through intuition. You can, you don't just mitigate a risk. You can pass on the risk, as one example. So, if I identify a risk and it's related to anything, right? So to all the listeners, we've sort of moved off Bitcoin here, but it was kind of like, oh, that's a risky thing still in the eyes of people. But I want to kind of uncover this new ideas, new concepts, new innovations thing. So me, like, risk is, I can hand that risk on to other people. And what I mean by that is, if there's something I'm wanting to know about, or I think is an opportunity, rather than just take on that risk, I will go and find somebody who knows something about that, and I'll strike up a conversation with them, and I'll get a good understanding that they know enough that if shit hits the fan, I can call on them to give me an explanation and, shortcut the research process, right? And so that's part of my risk strategy, is to do that, is to bring in, my new conversations about all of the things I do in technology, innovation, business. Make sure that I know somebody I can call on and mentally map that. Mitigating the risk. I generally don't mitigate risks 100%. I accept risks. That's probably the riskiest part of me. Um, you're, delegating the risk. So in, making financial decisions, I can delegate parts of the risk. And so I've got a financial advisor and I have an accountant. And in terms of finding those connections and those relationships, I didn't just go out and find the first accountant and the first financial advisor. I spoke to many people and tried to find ones that had similar characteristics to me personally, that meant that they were going to be making recommendations that were aligned with my needs, but also that I could pay it forward to them and give them value back to them in terms of referrals, which meant that, I could have better relationships with them, wouldn't cost me an arm and a leg, and I get to be able to delegate some risk to them around, helping me make decisions in this kind of space. And I do that in business as well. So the kind of delegating and transferring risk is a big thing that I like to do, and I like to sort of pay it forward. I'd be keen to kind of hear, hey, listeners out there, what do you think about risk, and how do you mitigate risk? What is risk to you in your life, in your professional world? How do you personally categorize risk? This is you, Ilan. Like, your risk to you. What is risk? What is the elevator pitch of what risk is to you, and how do you deal with risk?
I think it's it boils down to an appetite for things that you can't control. And for a lot of people, there's a combination of things that kind of fall into that category, and it's looked at differently depending on the topic that they're looking at. But I think, just to kind of go back to what you were saying earlier, where you were saying that for business and for finances or something like that, you've kind of got a tried and tested process. Say you were taking something that you weren't as comfortable with, you didn't even really know where to start. Kind of, how would you tackle it? How would you identify what your risk appetite was? And then how would you really kind of work through answering those questions to understand where it fell on the spectrum?
Well, me personally, I usually bring those big things to you, Ilan. Um, I've I don't know, that those the uncovering a concept before you understand it, without going into full lockdown theoretical research and trying to find out, every single nuts and bolts of an idea. And actually, speaking about, back to Bitcoin this weekend. So I okay, real story that happened on the weekend. So I had a conversation with one of my good friends last weekend. Hadn't seen him for a few years, and back in 2013, I think it was, when the white paper came out about Ethereum. So Ethereum is a blockchain alternative, slightly different mechanism in that you can build dApps, so decentralized apps, off the back of the Ethereum blockchain algorithm, which means that you can build in um, blockchain contracts into an application. And at the same time, it's backed by a coin. So there's the Ethereum coin behind it. And he and I had a conversation around the white paper when it first came out. And the white paper was handed to me through someone who I met at a meetup, who we just sparked up a random conversation about, where's technology going? And he was like, hey, blockchain, hey, and if you're going to talk about blockchain, forget the Bitcoin thing. Here's something with a bit of substance. And I kind of took it and went with it and read that white paper, and we chatted about it like at the end of this meetup. And then I was like, oh, I was obsessed with the concept of blockchain and the applications you can use in the technical world, in the business world, and replacing, all of these contracts and conversations and connections that are happening in the world. And then I took it to one of my slightly more technically astute friends. And so I knew this concept, but I had no idea about the technology. And we started talking, and um, I had to convince him that it was a good idea, because I was kind of taking that conversation about, but he's like, there's so many technical things to overcome, all about like the deployment, not having enough nodes, not being able to support it. What if this is the wrong one? What if there's another one that comes along? Um, and I actually, I actually went, oh, okay, that's not a, you've got a lot of really good points there. And I lost interest in it. I followed Ethereum, and I followed a lot of the, the dApps that came off, and I still kind of follow along with them, but I didn't actually invest in Ethereum, because those questions that came up kind of put me on the back foot. So one of the things I would say, that actually, my risk mitigation there was to listen to one of my technical people, one of my technical kind of network, right? Now that's a bad example, but moving forward to today, the conversation I had with him last weekend is like, hey, do you realize when we had that conversation, I started tracking Ethereum from that day in a tracking app, and we were talking about putting $10,000 each into this app, and he goes, do you look how much money we would have now if either of one of us would have jumped on that? I was like, wow, okay, cool. But the reason I'm sort of saying that is that risk aversion made me kind of think about the bigger, wider applications and the other things, which actually meant that I've been tracking those things subconsciously. So while I might have gone, I'm not going to accept that risk there, what it's made me do is actually track them subconsciously, which means that I've subconsciously kept on top of what's happening in that space. So the value's not gone. My strategy still worked in terms of having that conversation. And now I'm coming back to having someone, that conversation with someone else again, where now we're egging each other on to, okay, stop being so risk adverse in this space, trust in our confidence, in our process, in our thinking, that maybe there's something there. So yeah, like it's a bit of a story. And doing the research on the weekend, getting back into Bitcoin, having had done that kind of table research a few years ago and had followed it. What I was able to do this weekend when I jumped back in and bought a whole bunch of coins, was, rather than jumping into each and every one of the coins and looking at, what are they all about? What's their story? What's their marketing spin? I started looking at some of the attributes that they split them up by. Like, so looking at like the ones that are backed by real currency, so they're like for like, versus the ones that are backed by assets, versus the ones that are just contracts. I started looking at those concepts, and through that, I was able to apply that to kind of the network of information that I know, and narrow down my focus into what I actually care about. So, there's kind of a few steps in that exploration process, and I think you shouldn't rush it. When you find something that personally is risky to you, you shouldn't rush it. And
So do
don't.
you think you rushed it a little bit when you did look at it a few years ago?
Yeah, I think I rushed it. I think I rushed to the conclusion of don't jump into it. Which I could sit here and kick myself about forever and ever and a day. And I think a lot of people get hung up on opportunity cost as well when you're looking at risks. I'm telling myself now, well, the opportunity cost I've got, yeah, may not have cash in the bag, but what I do have is a greater um, respect for how something can evolve. Whereas if I was in there and I was one of the winners, I actually think that I wouldn't have as much of a respect for um, the history, because I would have been part of it. I would have been inside it, and I wouldn't been able to look back and go, what were some of the things I missed about looking for what some of the indicators in the market and this and that. So now I can appreciate it. So there is value that I got from making the decision not to get in. So my risk aversion actually gave me value. Um, and it made me now able to look at a lot more of the attributes around these new technologies and innovations in a totally different lens.
I think that's a good call out, because I think what you're seeing is not specific to the crypto space, but you're seeing it in the fintech space. You're seeing it in quite a few areas of technology that up until a few years ago, we probably didn't realize growth potential and the speed at which change can happen.
Mm.
So there was always this lingering thought that, well, there's time for it to prove itself before you need to actually um, execute on the risk.
Mm.
And maybe that underlying assumption was wrong.
Mm.
So the process that you use to kind of track risk, understand your tolerance level or something like that, yeah, maybe that was all right. But there was also an expectation there that you had more time to course correct if you were wrong.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, you've seen that through COVID as well, with some of the changes that are happening at such an accelerated pace.
Mm. I think um, there is a tendency to ignore one's inner intuition, inner voice, and jump on something because you're worried it's going to run away and take off. But um, I think that if we just follow the dollars, it's quite dangerous. I would if I would have jumped onto the Ethereum bandwagon, I wouldn't be where I am today, because I probably would have gotten more involved into trading, into following the crypto markets, and then understanding the technologies. And the dollars that are coming from that are fantastic, but the time and effort that I put into doing that research and following along with that, I look at the marketplace in Australia in terms of what's happening in products. That market actually hasn't started until now, right? It's starting now. So by me delaying and watching what happened and going, oh, okay, I missed out on the coin part of it, we can now have the discussion around, okay, what's some practical applications of some of these new innovations that are happening, not specifically in the coin, but in the other industries and other areas around it. To summarize, though, the key thing that I took from that was, and I still have a benefit of, is I had a conversation with somebody who had a different point of view and wasn't had a different point of view that wasn't in the same boat as me. If I would have spoken to like um, a clone of Zeke, I would have jumped in, right? Because we would have been in the same mindset and the same kind of point of view, same background, same understanding of it. So I think I made the right decision, and I think that there's byproducts that come of not taking risks, and I think that actually should be something we acknowledge. Everyone acknowledges when you don't take a risk, right? And sometimes people like berate you. Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do that? So reflect, think back. Okay, well, what's some of the value you got of not taking that risk? The lessons learned, the experience, the thoughts, the connections you made in going through that validation process, I think you can actually get a lot more value sometimes out of not doing something.
I think the one thing though that I would say on that is um, there is a bit of work that needs to happen from moving from making that decision subconsciously to consciously. So it's one thing that one of the I can't remember if it was Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett said, with every investment that they make, they'll look at the downside potentials and they'll actually attribute a rating to that. So it might be, you know what, a war's going to break out and it's going to have an impact. There's 10% likelihood of that happening. And then what's that downside likely to result in? And I think that's really powerful and something that we don't do enough. So when you were having that conversation with your friend, when you were reading the white paper, what was going through your head then? Did you actually then say, okay, well, you know what, if this all falls apart, you know what, regulation kicks in or something like that, there's a 10% probability of that happening, it drops to zero? Or did you just say, you know what, I've got all these unanswered questions, it's a bit too much, I can't really structure a view around this, so there's too many unknowns and that's why I'm out?
No, so this is the thing, right? We did all that analysis, and I remember going through and researching markets and researching the players in the markets, and how are those players going to be impacted. And like, this is the same sort of research you do if you're launching a product, but because we're doing it from a personal point of view, and because there was no business structure and no process, none of that's documented. And that's an interesting thing, right? Is that it's when we make decisions in life, um, for our own personal benefits, we don't give them as much rigor as if we would if we're in a business one, where we try to document certain things so then they are there for historical purposes to reflect on. But in our personal point of view, I don't have that, like, and it's not there. And it would be so good to go back to that and go, hang on, is there something I was thinking about back then that would make this whole new rediscovery process even more valuable? Or something that if someone asked me, hey, how come you didn't get in, I could go back and have that. I mean, I don't document my decisions not to do stuff. I document my decisions to do things because I'm in a relationship from a personal point of view. In my own personal business, I document them because I know that there's generally learnings to come from it. But yeah, do you document things when you do it? And if you do, how do you do it? No?
Oh, and I think it's a very good question, because when I reflect on some conversations that I have with those that are close to me, they all point out in conversations, oh, we've changed your view so much since we last spoke about it. Or you used to be categorically for this approach, and suddenly it's changed. We didn't know kind of what happened along the way, and sometimes it's actually really difficult to explain it. And I think that that process of documentation would actually be incredibly beneficial for me, because I can then look at it and go, well, what caused that change? What assumption did I challenge? Was it new information, or was it a better understanding of myself? Because then when similar things happen in the future, I can actually look at those assumptions, the assumptions that I'm making, and I've got a better mental model for assessing them and seeing whether they actually stack up, or whether they want ones that actually need a bit more work.
Yeah, and you can learn from the process you did it, which means that you can take on more without less load. Your research, so
And you can do it quicker.
yeah, exactly, and which means you can churn through and process more information in a faster pace. But we don't, and it's like you kind of we stumbled onto something here. Is that there are no real principles for how to like I don't know, businessify your life. We don't get taught, at least in Australia, and I don't know any other country that's come out and said, oh yeah, we're taught all this stuff, like personal accounting, um, networking, decision making, risk management, all of these kinds of principles that you learn through your professional career. And you kind of, every man and his dog's got their own way that they've learned through professional career. That's all kind of stuff that is critical to your day-to-day life as an adult. But none of that is taught to us. And, every man and his dog's spoken about the fact that none of this is taught to us. But principles. What are some of the principles for living? Like one we've just got there, which is like principles for living is document your decisions almost, as a principle. How you do that is totally separate to the principle, but, you know, learn to reflect and document your decisions. I think if I could look back to my 20-year-old self, I'd be going, Zeke, you're an adult now. When you make a decision, document it. And underneath that is, Zeke, learn what a decision is, right? Because decisions have massive ripple effects. And I think that, when I was young, I made decisions and I didn't even know I was making decisions, right?
And I think that's one of the big call outs, because what I was going to say is the whole thought process around, understand your decisions, document them, learn from them, speed up the process. It's very similar to the topic that we were talking about earlier, just around the crypto space, changes in COVID or something. In hindsight, you realize how fundamental those conversations were and how pivotal those moments were. But it's all in hindsight. So before we even start by questioning and documenting the decisions you make for things you do and don't do, you first need to actually build an awareness to the fact that those are decision points.
Yep.
And I think that in itself takes years and years to understand and develop. So could you be taught that earlier? Could you be taught to be a bit more aware?
Oh,
good question.
Buzzword, mindful, right? Mindful of your decisions. Oh man, I would have killed to have known. Well, not known, but it's like the level up above known. It's like inside my body, know the impacts or the flow on effects of a decision, that it really hit home, that I didn't just take things so haphazardly, that I was able to come back and find ways to keep it front of mind at the right time. And I think there's another principle for living that we can talk about is, how do you make time? How do you come back to something? So say we've got decisions nailed, and we've kind of inside that we've got reflection, which is implicit with the decision, right? How do you then make sure that you come back to it? Because I know so many times, and you hit it in a second, it's like you've changed your thinking. It's like, how do you come back to stuff? Like, do you do it at the moment? I know I don't.
And I think it takes a lot of discipline, and it's one of those things. It's around habit forming. Yes, there's definitely certain areas in my life that I do come back to things and I do challenge it. But the problem is the shiny, exciting areas that you're constantly revisiting are not necessarily going to be the ones that are pivotal in your development. So it might be something. Go for it.
You just said it. You like forming habits, right? But then I think it's like, form habits, document in some way, shape, or form, or mentally document them. Let people know your habits, or let yourself or your close circle know them, but then revisit your habits. That's the way that you do it. You have to say, these are my habits. And instead of coming back to the decisions you've made, you come back to your habits, and then you reflect on your habits. These are my habits today. And in X amount of time, say 12 months. These were my habits at the start of these 12 months. These are my habits now. Why did I change those habits? And inside there is locked up all of the great and beautiful insight about how you've grown as an individual. Like we're always coming up with new habits, but man, you give up a habit to take on a new habit, and you're like, when did that happen?
So I think this is actually a great segue for what we can talk through next time we catch up, and that's around habits and compounding effects. Because I think that as you get older, or as you start getting a little bit more well-read, for those of us that started late in life, the compounding effect is missed. And when you keep chopping and changing, whether it's habits, whether it's other areas of your life, you lose a lot of that benefit. So, you know, how much time needs to be focused on consistency? How much area of your life do you leave open to change, learn, innovate, grow, and how much do you need to keep stable?
Yep.
For next week.
For next week. And growing on top of that for next week as well, you've just triggered into something else I was thinking about during the week. I want to start to talk about the theory of human harmony, which is just a coin that I'm terming at the moment, which is it's around this habits. It's around this, how do you consistently grow in yourself, which is the very Western world version of things. But how do you have a world full of people that are individually growing and they're all on their own versions of their own journeys? And how do you do that in harmony? That means that there's equity between each and every person. That means that no one is disadvantaged. Is there a theory?
The pie gets bigger. You're not stealing the space.
Yeah, and how? Like, what is the theory of that? What are some of the concepts behind that human harmony? The theory of human harmony, to be delved into next week. Ilan, insight of the day, on the spot. Quote, something you're reading right now. Give me something that I can ponder on.
Listen more, talk more, speak to more diverse people. Even if you think you're doing enough, you probably aren't.
Ooh, push yourself. All right, love it. Until next week, ladies and jelly beans. It's been great. I'm Zeke Condon.
Ilan, chat to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.